Our programs develop students' confidence, independence, curiosity, and responsibility. We believe that turbocharging a high-quality education with the social and emotional development of excellent summer enrichment ultimately builds pathways for future connections and positions students to be successful through college, career, and life. Change Summer's work has never been more important. The undeniable reality is that the under-resourced communities from which our campers come have been hit the hardest by the pandemic and the resulting economic recession. Our North Star has always been an equal opportunity for all. And now more than ever, we feel a deep responsibility to close the opportunity and fairness gaps that pervade American society. At our core, we are an advocate and driver for real sector-wide change. To that end, we developed this 3-part panel series titled Real Conversations, Real Impact, during which we will tackle critical topics to catalyze the deep and lasting change required for greater equity. Today's panel is titled Counteracting the Effects of COVID through Social Emotional Learning. From today, we hope that you will gain actionable ideas about how you can be part of real change. The health and economic ramifications of COVID-19 and continued racial injustice have shed additional light on the vast disparities that pervade American society. Our under-resourced communities, the communities we serve, have been impacted the most by the pandemic. We know many of our campers and their families are under a great deal of economic and emotional stress. This panel discussion will tackle how social emotional learning actively combats some of the inequities that have been amplified this past year. Our work at Change Summer to close social emotional learning and opportunity gaps is truly a work in progress. So many of you joining us today are in the midst of doing the same work, not just providing lip service to leveling the playing field, but taking action to change hearts, minds, and organizations. It requires a relentless focus, and it will take time. But if we stay at it, we can change this country. I have the good fortune of being connected to today's esteemed panelists in a number of ways, and I've learned so much from them about how to approach this work with authenticity and with equity always at the center. Like all of you, I look forward to learning from each of them today. This panel is not in any way scripted. Our panelists are all here to share openly and honestly. To that end, let's get started with some panelist introductions. We will start with Julie, followed by Giselle, Rich, and Jabali.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Jackson, and I'm the president of Uncommon Schools. We serve 55 schools across 6 regions and 21,000 students. The importance of social emotional learning in the pandemic for me centers around refilling one's own cup. Refilling one's own cup first. I am a firm believer that when you refill your own cup, then you can fully giveth personally and professionally to others and still be well. This is true for adults and especially true for children as we continue to navigate the pandemic.
Good afternoon. My name is Giselle Shorter. I lead the National K-12 Portfolio of Giving at the Rakes Foundation. The heartbeat of my school and system redesign portfolio is the Building Equitable Learning Environments Network. Collectively, our Bell membership leverage our resources to develop an education system that ensures the intellectual, social, emotional, and cultural growth and development of all young people and results in social cultural markers having zero predictive power over outcomes for students. So, when I think of SEL in this moment, it reminds us, it brings us back to the primacy of relationships. The science is clear, but practice is even more clear on 2 things. The first, that a young person's academic, social, and emotional development are inextricably linked. Another way of saying learning is and has always been inherently social and emotional. The second is that the quality of a young person's learning environment, their experiences, and the access to opportunities determine their development and academic outcomes. Happy to be in this conversation.
Thanks, Giselle. I'm Rich Berlin. I am the executive director of DREAM, a 30-year-old community-based nonprofit operating several extended day, extended year charter schools in East Harlem and the South Bronx in New York. Our journey into that work started as a sports-based youth development program where SEL is both the meta and the thing itself of our work. And when I think about the role of SEL in this time in particular, I think about the reality that we have never been more socially distant or separated from each other. And emotionally, we've probably never been more challenged. And those two things are interrelated. And as shared, we really believe that the foundation for any kind of efficacy or competency, whether it be school-based, work-based, relationship-based, is grounded in social emotional learning and competency. And our intentionality around that work, both teaching explicitly SEL skills, embedding SEL work into our daily instructional practices, and supporting the adults who are charged with taking care of our children is a real mandate for this time.
Thanks, Rich. Peace, everybody. Jabali Sawicki here, Compass Director at NXU. NXU is an organization that helps youth identify, articulate, and pursue their purpose in life. So help them answer the deepest and most fundamental existential question that all human beings must answer in life. And when I think about SEL, I think about, just first and foremost, it's the foundation of any positive learning environment. If there's anything the past 10 months have shown us, is how critical SEL is for both our students, for our teachers, for our staff, and for our families. And again, fundamentally, SEL is about seeing people as humans and allowing them to thrive as humans. And that's what we need to tap into at this point in time. Gratitude to everybody for keep doing the work, for shining, for persevering through all this. Great to be on this panel and to share learning with all of you guys.
Excellent. Thank you all. As you can see, we have assembled quite a group here, and we're going to dive right into questions in just a minute so that they can give us all of their expertise and experience. One logistical note before we start: if people watching have any questions for the group of panelists, please just use the chat feature on Zoom. We are going to make sure that we leave some time towards the end of the discussion for questions from the audience. So please use the chat feature on Zoom for that, and folks who are helping out with the panel will get to those questions. With that, we're going to dive in to our first question, which is I wanted to start with how outside of school programs, things that happen in the summer, activities happening after school, extracurricular activities, how those programs have impacted each of your lives, kind of your personal lives growing up, and your professional lives and your career. So would love to dive into that a little bit. Let's start with Giselle, and we can go from there.
So this puts me in a interesting space, and it shows my hand a little bit, my response. But I think I am who I am, and I show up in the way that I do because of the parents I had, but mostly the community that I had. So I grew up in Spanish Harlem, the very community in which Richard serves. My mother grew up in the same community. And despite having grown up in that community during a period of crack cocaine, I am clear that it was the most nurturing environment, an environment that told me, not only am I beautiful, I am special, I am worthy, I am talented. And so the continuum of reinforcement through summer, through after school, through academic experiences, it was a loop, right, that supported healthy identity development, a sense of self and efficacy, but also a deep commitment to community and to ensuring that the extreme privilege that I had to go to some of the best independent private schools in the country, that I was making sure that others would have opportunities, and where I could go freely, that I would create space for others from my community when they got there and that they were welcomed. And so there is no distinction between schooling and the out of school time for me. And it was all reinforcing.
Yep. Love that. Thank you. Thank you, Giselle. Julie, you want to weigh in?
Yes, my response is similar to Giselle in terms of it's all intertwined to me. And I think that's what is the best experience when you're not just doing school and just doing activities to get at this social emotional piece. So when I think of who I am first as self, who I am as a mother, who I am as a teacher, and who I am as a leader, I can name the 7 people who influenced me, who were teachers and coaches. And they are who taught me the lifelong lessons. They taught me how to show up and be excited to be in the room. They also told me how to process feedback, and you learn from your failures. I think I'm as strong today because of the lessons I learned along the way. These activities and mentorships taught me about team and mentorship. I ran track and played basketball. Track is unique in the sense that it's individual and it's team. You have to get the individual points, but then run on a relay. So when I think about summer school and activities, as Giselle said, in school, they're all interconnected to me. And because of those lifelong lessons, being competitive in high school and middle school was important to me. And as an adult, I started doing some other races because it allowed me to challenge myself. And one of the things I learned early on from a coach that he said to me is, you never know your capacity until you push yourself. There are few people in life who ever truly reach their capacity. And that has stuck with me, and it has been lifelong lessons. Those same ideals is how I show up as a leader and how I'm an advocate for our kids. Our students need activities during school that are embedded in the program, not separate from the program. And they also need opportunities in the summer to have these lifelong lessons. So I'm excited to begin the conversation today.
Thanks, Julie. Let's go with Rich and then Jabali.
Yeah, for me, sports was what helped me grow up and taught me just about everything I've carried into adulthood. It was a place to master something. It was a place to gain positive identity. It was a place to understand how to manage myself and my emotions. And it was a place to gain social capital and build social skills on teams. And it was even a place where, you couldn't be unless those skills were being transferred into the academic environments. That was a very clear trade-off for me growing up, and we've built it as a very clear trade-off for our young people who love playing sports and being on teams here as well. I just think, our organization started as a summer learning program, and all of our partnerships were with traditional public schools, mostly schools that were failing or deemed failing in one way or another. And what I remember most is that, kids really enjoyed the environment we built for them. And it looked and felt so different from what they experienced in schools. And when we went about the business of designing an educational model for kids, whether it be an extended day in summer context or in school, we just knew we had to bring those lessons as the foundational pieces, which brought kids joy and challenged them and create an environment where they were doing this work together and not left all alone to to learn abstract lessons. They need lessons that resonate in their life.
Yeah, and listen, I gotta start where Giselle started and shout out my mom, who before SEL was even a thing, one of her duties was the manager, the director of operations, of creating and structuring all my SEL development. And she understood early on why that was important. And I start there because I've read a lot of articles recently about people pointing out that, wow, parents are now realizing how hard it is to be a teacher. And when I look at the situation, I flip it. And I think what we need to recognize is teachers and educators need to recognize how hard it is to be a parent. And so my mom built the structure around me. I also had the privilege of going to some pretty great schools, but on the deepest level, school to me felt obligatory. And all the stuff that I did outside of school, the sports, the art, that was what felt personal, and that was what resonated with me as an authentic human being. And so I thought of school as the place where I got knowledge, and it was incredibly valuable, but the SEL structures around me is where I developed and gained wisdom. And it was that wisdom and life experience, which is ultimately dictated the path that I've been on in life. I was a middle school science teacher way back with Josh in the early 2000s. And again, before SEL, I told people I teach 5% science, 95% how to live life. And I founded a school for Black boys in Bed-Stuy. And again, that was about identity formation. But all of the lessons I learned outside of school, even though I had great mentors and teachers, this like self-individuation for me, all of that happened in the rich spaces that just happened to be outside of school, because it allowed me to stretch my wings in ways that I could develop, but I probably couldn't because I was limited by the structures of school.
Well said. Thank you. Those are incredibly in-depth answers. So appreciate them. And you all out there can imagine how fortunate I was to be able to teach sixth grade with Jabali and learn from him when we were teaching. It was a great time. I would just say that the social emotional piece in my mind, and in particular with the four of you, no question that you're all incredibly bright and have tremendous knowledge. But I think that part of the reason why you're on panels like this and leading organizations and have led organizations for a number of years is in large part due to the experiences that you just talked about. No question that the academic foundation really important and necessary and foundational, but without some of the experiences and exposures, whether it was from family or through participation in art and athletics and other extracurricular social emotional opportunities, I think you would all say, or you would all agree that you wouldn't be in the places you are now. So I think it's incredibly important. Okay, great. I'm going to shift to our second question, and for this one, we'll switch the order up a little bit. We'll have Jabali kick it off, and then we'll go around the horn. So the question is, how has the social emotional development of children, especially children from under-resourced communities, been impacted by COVID? So what have you seen in various places around the impact of COVID vis-a-vis social emotional development?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And I think it is very obvious that there's been a ratcheting up of the impact. I just want to start just by pointing out that for the students that we serve, the trauma has existed long before the pandemic. And so when we talk about solutions, when we talk about why this is important right now, I just don't want to lose the fact that it's always been important. And if this serves as a wake-up call for why we should be thinking about this, fantastic. But when we go back to normal, what we can't do is go back to the normal where we assume that because the pandemic is not happening, the trauma as a result of isolation, of financial instability, like mortality, all those things are real and have always been real for Black and brown people. But I mean, I think for our students, this is hitting acutely hard. I think just fundamentally, as I've interacted with students over the past 10 months, I think a couple things are happening. One, you know, they're moving from a typical sense of you know, skepticism to apathy, to we're at the point now where there's this fear that I have of just nihilism, just this questioning of why this is all important. As Giselle pointed out, fundamentally, evolutionarily, human beings are social creatures, right? That distinguishes us from many species in the animal kingdom, and we've lost the ability to do that. We've lost the ability for students to rely on their sources of social support. High school is a time where students are relying on their peers to develop their sense of identity. So they've lost the ability to in essence, become independent. They've lost an ability to connect and to draw strength and meaning from their social connections. They've lost the ability to connect with the adults, the mentors, the teachers who help them navigate adolescence. Like all that precedes what they've lost in terms of academics. So there's an intellectual impact, there's the mental health impact. And again, for those that we serve, again, when things go back to the quote unquote normal, I think there's going to be a longer period of transition given all the traumas that our students are facing.
Thanks, Jabali. You all can chime in as you wish.
So I think I'll pick up on the thread that trauma was with us pre-COVID. You know, we at Rake start the conversation with our commitment to systems change and an analysis of the systems that is rooted in the truth of their origin story, right? And so rooted in racist ideologies, clear valuations of who matters, who doesn't, and the ways in which multiple systems often come to bear in the lives of young people and families. So when we talk about resource rich versus under-resourced communities, that isn't by accident, right? And so COVID, and I would argue that 2020, most of us, particularly the communities that you're calling out, Josh, went through probably 5 or 6 different crises at once, right? So a health crisis, what had been like an existential climate crisis was made even more poignant and real for many, economic. And then because of the crisis of police violence, particularly against Black and brown bodies, a social and racial reckoning that arguably is long overdue. And so when we talk about the particular communities that are resource deprived, not by accident. So COVID sits on top of those broken systems that have always created disproportionate impact in the lives of the very people we're talking about. So COVID made more evident what was already there. I would call out that there have always been and continue to be community stakeholders like Kingmakers of Oakland, right? Folks that are in and of community, that see the genius in young people, that empower, embolden, and support young people to lead, that have created even broader, greater contexts and platforms for young people to live out loud beyond the isolation of their homes through social media and other vehicles. And so if there's any upside of 2020, it's that most of the young people had outlets that could allow them to live beyond the physical space and be intimate and proximate. And so we're seeing really dynamic ways, and I would just call out, if folks are looking for models like that, Kingmakers and their street team. I mean, that's a whole new line of resource led by you know, Black boys and men out of Oakland that are creating intimacy with communities across the country, student to student, Black boy to Black boy, Black man to Black man, and opening up different conversations to say, I see you. How do we ride this together? How do we navigate?
Great, thanks. Rich, Julie, anything to add on this question?
I thought that was pretty powerful, Giselle. Thank you.
The only thing that I would add, all that resonates with me. The thing that I would add, because like through this pandemic, I'm living with a freshman in high school and a senior. So I can directly see how they're impacted by this, right? As Jabali talked about, that losing the ability to interact with your peers as a high school student has been devastating to kids. It also made more evident that inequities that actually exist. They've always been there, but now it made it more evident. So the thing that I would add is for our students that we serve, we lost the ability to process with them. So they're not able to process these things and put them in context. You know, what is happening in the riots and why the looting is happening, and put it in context. So they're getting all of that from their friends. So when I'm listening to my son talk to his friends and they're coming up with the whys and the hows, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not the historical context of it, right? But they're losing that ability to process that. And I think what else is happening, we're underestimating the impact that it's having on the adults. So the adults have to still show up on the screen and teach the kids, but they haven't been able to process. Their own wellness is not well, but they're required to be all these things to students when they're still processing it all. So that's the only thing I would add as we continue to navigate this.
Great. Thank you. All right, we are going to do a little bit of multimedia here. So bear with us, hopefully it'll work. We're gonna put up a slide, and the question that I want folks to react to when the slide goes up is, how should schools and youth development organizations be thinking about SEL development in the post-COVID era? So once the slide goes up, there you go. Again, the question is, how should schools, youth development organizations, and you can even add funders and foundations, be thinking about social emotional development in the post-COVID era? And I will just open it up to you all. Feel free to chime in.
Josh, there was a piece, I think, in the New York Times last week where one of the national union leaders was talking about the need to invest in summer school. There's likely to be, for the first time ever in the upcoming stimulus bill, a big chunk of it dedicated to summer programs. So it's not particularly surprising that organized labor would want to claim that. But I had a particularly strong reaction to it because to the points that were just made, what everyone will be doing for the next year, notwithstanding what almost every Black and brown person in America is doing all the time, is recovering from trauma. For affluent people, the last year has been highly disruptive. For poor people, for Black and brown people, for people dealing with the multiple pandemics that have been discussed, the last year has been deeply traumatic. And yes, every kid who didn't go to school except on a screen for the last year has got loads to make up in terms of their academic learning. But nobody's going to make any progress on that if we don't tend to that trauma. That is the trauma of the adults who teach, first and foremost, the people who are taking care of our kids, or coach, or mentor, or whatever their interaction with young people, ensuring that those people are whole and ready to re-engage is critical. And that then we are doing very explicit work, trauma-informed and otherwise, in our lesson planning, whether it be explicit SEL or embedded SEL, and that above all, like, the months ahead are times to rebuild relationships. Like the whole course of our work is dependent upon relationships, peer-to-peer, peer-to-adult. Nothing happens without that. And if we don't prioritize that, nothing we do after will matter.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. I know, Julie, I know you all have been thinking a little bit about summer and have gotten pressure to try to do a lot with summer school and summer academy. And I know you and I have had a few offline conversations about, yes, that while that may be important, but to Rich's point, there's a whole other bucket around trauma and dealing with trauma and also ensuring our students get to do some of the relationship building and repairing some of the relationships that have been lost over the last 10 months.
Yeah, I agree with Rich. We've been thinking a lot about that relationship piece and how you rebuild them. There is a lot of pressure about summer and kids are behind and how are we catching kids up and how are we closing these gaps really fast. But the thing that we did and stepped back is we paused and said, do you see the kids? Do you see them? And we had to take a step back there and put some systems into place. So we've already started thinking about when we first went remote, everyone was just like, let's get the gaps closed, let's teach the kids. As we watched on the screen, we realized really early on, kids weren't excited to show up. They became disengaged. So we had to take a step back last summer and say, what is the missing component? The missing component is you're not building relationship with kids on the screen, you're not seeing them. So we stepped back and we retrained Zaretta Hammond's framework on culturally responsive teaching. Just what does that look like and what does that feel like? And then we've always been, community has always been important to us, but we started building ways for community to see kids on the screen. So for example, lessons starting with asking the children is how are the children? Giving children a chance to talk and process what is happening to them before deep diving into content. So we have been putting a bunch of systems in place that daily allow us to build relationships as much as we can virtually. But then thinking about summer, and we will have a summer program, but a component of that has to be SEL. It can't just be the academics. And how do we embed that as we continue to move forward with that? And we're also thinking about, we're going to implement, we have a wellness working group that we launched across the organization. And that wellness working group, I think as Rich talked about, it's not just for student wellness, it's for adult wellness. So we're coming up with a framework and toolkit that teachers can use as ways to help start to tackle this.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think there are so many dynamics that are coming to bear all at once, right? So a reality that we have collapsed and continue to collapse Black, Brown with poor and disenfranchised. That systems have and continue to underserve even the most affluent Black and Brown children, right? And so in this moment, my vision, the support that I provide to operators, to networks of districts, is about supporting systems to reliably shift the experience for those who have had the least generative, the least empowering, the least identity-rich experience, and to reliably produce healthy whole child outcomes. And so if that has been my due north, it'll continue to be my due north in our investing. And so I think post-COVID, there's an opportunity, rooted in the pandemic, because pandemics has always forced people to reimagine systems anew, but there's an opportunity to have some real conversation, real talk about who is least well served and why. And to shift from the interventional approach and the focus on how do we more clearly diagnose dysfunctions in students and adults, in individuals, versus what are the system mechanisms that need to be in place, the learning environments that create reliably so healthy outcomes that are absolutely about what we understand as our leading indicators. I could make a compelling argument that they're lagging around academics, right? But the full spectrum of what we know healthy development really is about. And so I am hopeful that on the back end of COVID, more folks are stimulated to lean into that body of work, which is much more about the system, much more about reliably so. And another way of framing that would be, how do you create the mechanisms to reliably see and deploy resources to those that need them most, and in ways that would resonate and be valuable for that young person, that family, that community. So I'm hopeful on that score. We at Rakes and our partners have developed a variety of tools and resources that are cataloged in the Bell framework and library, which is a starting place, right? A starting place, not because we deem them high yield, but because schools, districts across the country have found success and are elevating these tools and resources as starting places. And so what I can do in this moment and have done is to say, how do I get these tools and resources out to exponentially more adults and system leaders?
Thanks, Giselle. Jabali, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think just to keep going with what Giselle's talking about, I think I'm most interested in schools and organizations not planning a response to COVID, but to pause in real time and look under the hood and ask, why is school not working for kids right now? Why is school not working for teachers right now? Why is school not working for families right now? Why is school not working for communities right now? And my hypothesis is all of those reasons still exist after the pandemic. So I think this is a critical moment to just take a step back and, again, at a fundamental first principle levels, just help schools try to reimagine what is the purpose of this institution and the work that we're doing. And I think that will lead to some profound insights that wouldn't have come if there wasn't a reckoning around what we're currently going through. But I think centralizing students, centralizing families in a way where we've come to realize how critical they are is a path forward. And then just to think about integration, that this work is not about a Band-Aid approach. It's not about applying a curriculum, but if every single member of the community is impacted in some way by the relationships, by the understanding of the deeper motivation for why we do the work, the aspirations for why we're engaged in this collective endeavor, I think all of the things that we need to do need to be integrated and expand out from within to every constituency, and to be done in a strategic manner.
On that point, and sorry to jump back in here, I don't want to be a contrarian. We're acknowledging that school didn't work pre-COVID for some young people because it wasn't designed to. We should also call out that there are some young people that are thriving. Particularly, we're seeing Black and brown boys for whom school sent a variety of messages that it was not for them, and it didn't work, that are excelling in the context of learning and growing in community with parents and extended stakeholders, right? The kinds of generative experiences that, rooted me in who I am and how I can have impact in the world, that Jabali talked about, that others, Julie. So we should figure out, how do we create that context, and how do we maintain the kind of interconnected dynamics with family and community that COVID forced us to, that for many systems, that was not the prevailing way of doing business before COVID, but that we should be retaining post-COVID.
Love it, Giselle. Excellent. There is hope. There is a way to do this, and appreciate you raising that.
And just if I could piggyback on that, I mean, I think the danger is when we talk about Black and brown people, the narrative is about deficits, right? So when we think about students who aren't logging in, if you don't understand the cultural context, if you don't understand people and families at the level of individuals, it's highly likely the person who's not logged in is caring for a family member who's sick or has to work a job. And so I think often the greatest strengths that our students are actually bringing, the greatest strengths that our families are bringing, the greatest strengths within our communities somehow aren't being viewed as assets. And so to Giselle's point, we need to look at the struggles that all of us are going through, but identify the ways in which Black and brown people who have a rich history of resilience and thriving, like how is that playing out? Because that's when people feel the most alive, right? That's when they feel like they're making the greatest contributions to society. That's when the seed is planted that I have enough strength that I can lead my people, that I can lead my community. But if no one is recognizing that in the spaces that we've created for them, that's a lost opportunity, and that's the opposite of SEL.
And on a very micro level, like, right, what we're talking about is being seen. Does your teacher see you? Does your coach see you? And right, the challenge we have now, no one can recognize your emotions through a screen, right? No one can label what you are feeling because they can't talk to you about it, right? They don't understand the causes and consequences of your emotions in ruler terminology, right? Because all they have is this, are you on the screen or not? And we will have this moment, hopefully starting soon, when most kids are back. And if the investment isn't there, and if that investment, as Giselle said, if that paradigm doesn't change, then we've got, even bigger problems than we had before this thing.
We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why we're all here. I'm going to actually go to a clip, a video clip, and that's our second relatively risky multimedia presentation on this panel. We're going to play a clip that is a little over a minute. And for the panelists, but also for people who are listening, before we play the clip, the question is, what should schools and youth development organizations be doing to combat childhood trauma, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19, with the caveat that, as many folks have said on the panel, this trauma for a lot of folks, in particular folks in under-resourced communities, this trauma is nothing new. It's just been exacerbated by COVID-19. So what should schools and youth development organizations be doing to combat childhood trauma, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19? We're going to play the clip for about a minute, and then we will come back and answer that.
Of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And for a lot of people, that's a terrifying prospect. The scope and scale of the problem seems so large that it feels overwhelming to think about how we might approach it. But for me, that's actually where the hope lies. Because when we have the right framework, when we recognize this to be a public health crisis, then we can begin to use the right toolkit to come up with solutions. From tobacco to lead poisoning to HIV/AIDS, the United States actually has quite a strong track record with addressing public health problems. But replicating those successes with ACEs and toxic stress is going to take determination and commitment. And when I look at what our nation's response has been so far, I wonder, why haven't we taken this more seriously?
Really powerful stuff. I'm glad that the multimedia worked. So the question is, what should schools and youth development organizations and others, funders you could put in there as well, be doing to combat childhood trauma, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19? This kind of is the follow-up question to the conversation that we were just having.
We can tell you what the funders should do. That's easy.
All right, fine, I'll go. So I can share what my community, and I think of my Bell community as co-conspirators. We put out, like I said, a framework, not a meta like guidance research tool, but rather in relation to a set of commitments that arguably should have always been so about the grammar of schooling in this country, even more so in this moment, should become just the coin of the realm and how we engage in the work. And so there's that framework, which is looking out across the field, and by no means is it exhaustive. And then a set of essential actions, right, that roots in things like, partnering, and it's crazy that we have to say this, but partnering authentically with students, family, educators, and community partners to co-design practices and policies, right, that support students and adults to thrive and excel. I never talk about student success without saying, and we need to be attuning to the workforce adult needs, because adults are mediators and moderators of all student experience, all student outcome, right? And so how do we engage in the work? How do we ensure culturally affirming and anti-racist curricula and teaching practices are just what we do, not what we do for a subset of those kids, right? But all kids, right? And how do we think about what are, as Jabari said, not just the goals of the institution, but the goals of education. What is our collective idea and understanding of how we design and curate learning environments to ensure that young people are seen, they are valued, they are respected, but most of all, the set of skills and awareness that are being developed in any one child is about identifying who they want to be in the world and having the agency and the skill set to actively pursue that. And so we also have our essential actions, but I think being in a conversation, right? Being in a conversation about how did we get here? What is the legacy of our systems and our origin story? And then building collective will and demand for a new form of education that is 360, that values not only the out of school time, but is increasingly centering not only student experience, but student, family, and community as allies and co-conspirators in creating a system anew.
Thanks, Giselle. Well said. Julie, Rich, Jabali, are things that you guys are thinking about at your organizations around how to combat some of the challenges associated with trauma, things that you're doing, or just things that you're starting to think about and plan for?
A couple of things, and it kind of expands off what Giselle said. First, we just have to have the conversation and name it, because no one's really talking about it and naming that this is a problem and it exists. When I talk to the social workers, they get very frustrated because everyone thinks it's a social work problem. And they're like, Julie, we are not even talking about this. We don't have the same vocabulary around this. So first and foremost, we have to name that this is a situation, and we have to have come together, and not just the schools, the families, and the parents to come together to talk about how do we apply this in schools, right? The one struggle is resources. We all know these resources are quite limited. So even once you identify that, students need additional services or families, it's about finding those resources and what that means and what that looks like. So again, I think I take it back a little bit to the wellness piece as we're actually starting to think about it and name it, and then figuring out how to help our social workers get additional resources, because it's not a social work problem. So as an organization, making it org-wide, as an organization, we believe that it is our duty to play a role in this. And how do we bring the community and the funders in? So in addition to people asking how they can contribute to closing the academic situation, how are we helping with this piece in developing that whole child? And I think what I would say on the screen right now, what we're doing around this is we are actually pausing. Yes, this subject is important. You must pause and give kids a chance to just regroup and get their thoughts together, and that's okay. And what we've been really thinking about and developing out a lot more than we were a few years ago is student voice, right? Where is the student voice? Student voice allows them to be their best selves and helps determine their journey. And we put things in place. And again, not that it's rigid in place, but what we found is if you're not aware of this as an educator, you don't think to do it. And just as we plan for content, this is part of the content, so we want to embed it.
And just a tactical tool, and this forms the foundation of the work we do at NXU, which is around purpose, which is around helping students and educators and adults identify their sense of purpose in life. The research around youth purpose development has borne out that individuals that have a strong sense of purpose are better able to cope and overcome trauma. And so when we think about like what are things that we can help students do, it's have them understand their why, have a narrative for how to process their life experiences. And through that meaning making, being able to take that and turn it into some kind of asset. And so that's the work that we're doing. And it's something that's easily accessible. It's relatively free in terms of just how you think about yourself, but it's about empowering. And so we're not solving the trauma necessarily, but we're providing a tool that empowers. We're providing a tool that leads to self-efficacy, that leads to agency. And when students leave us, when they leave our four walls, they go out into life. And so the traumas aren't going to go away. They're going to exist. They're going to take different shapes and forms. And so how do we prepare our students to live a life where they have the mindsets, the emotional skills, and the strong sense of identity and the legacy from which they come from? How can we turn that into something that they can use to combat these traumas going forward?
Thanks, John. Rich, anything to add?
I mean, all the things, and not really anything new. I mean, you know, Dream is a whole child school. We put academics, SEL, DEI, anti-racism, and family and community engagement. Those are four verticals, and no one of them is more important than the other, and no one of them, you know, can get left behind. I will tell you, when we tell that story of our work, historically, we get a lot of, particularly from the funding and policy community, we get a lot of heads being shaken at us. You know, that takes too much time. That is too expensive. That's distracting. Of course, these are not things that are distracting for any of our own children. We would never say any one of those things doesn't belong in their lives. But in communities where all systems are failing kids, well, schools will just fix this, and after school will fix this, and summer will fix this. And hopefully everybody puts a real nice DEI lens on it all, and we'll all hold hands and walk down the street and be in the exact same place we were 25 years ago. And if, like, as I reflect on the question the doctor asked on the video, why is this? Well, we all know the reasons. This is like this because people have decided and or accepted that some people's lives aren't as important as other people's lives. And like this is a moment like where we have to reject that idea, not just like in ideology, we have to reject that idea in policy and resources. We must. And that's a type of ambition and system building that is like a big global worldwide never-ending project, but it has to be the vision that like the outcome we want for all kids is the same. And so the resources and inputs we put into that have to be the same. And the understanding we come to it has to be shared. And that is this moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. I would just add that this is something we're thinking about deeply at Change Summer for our 2 summer programs in summer 21. And we're thinking about it for our campers. We're thinking about it for our junior counselors who are rising seniors in high school. We're thinking about it for the large majority of our counseling staff, which are alumni of Achievement First and Uncommon Schools. And we're very carefully putting together trauma-informed practices for this summer. And arguably, we should have been doing this in as a robust way prior to summer 21, but we're utilizing summer 21 as a vehicle to really ramp up in this way. And fortunately for us, camp, for those who have been fortunate enough to attend any kind of camp, camp lends itself really well to these kinds of conversations around things that Jabali was talking about in terms of purpose and identity, and building confidence in a way that is going to help you as you certainly going to experience elements of trauma moving forward. So we're actually, we're incredibly excited about this summer for all sorts of reasons, and really hope we can do it in person. That's the plan. But we're really excited about it because we feel like when we bring our community together, that community that we're talking about, these conversations have real impact. These conversations around what you're experiencing and doing it with people who care deeply about you, who you are building relationships with for life. It's really something special to see. So I'm just really praying that we're going to be able to pull it off and do it in person. We're a little over 1 o'clock. We're going to go to 1:15. I thought we would do one final question and then get some questions from the audience. So the 4 of you had talked a little bit about families and community, which is obviously incredibly important. Just love your quick take on how we can and should be engaging families, and how we can provide support to families, many of whom are facing significant challenges historically and currently. So sort of the community engagement piece, which for Rich, I know that's a big part of your work. Certainly, Julie, a big part of your work, and I know Giselle and Jabali, you all think about this all the time. So, kind of family and community engagement. What more should we be doing, or what should we be doing?
And, for any of us who thought we were committed to family and community engagement, having our staff inside of people's homes every day for the last 10 months, I think was anything, from like a reminder to sort of a shocking awakening for people. We when we start at the beginning with our work, we think a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and, basic human needs at the foundation: shelter, food, a sense of safety and belonging when you walk outside every day. And I think we all know that before the pandemic, that's not a given for many of the families that our schools and work serves. And it's only gotten worse. And we have done things that we've never done before organizationally this last year: weekly food pantries, direct cash assistance to families on a regular basis. And we're trying to figure out now, like, what of that lives and expands going forward? Because if kids come to school hungry, or if kids come to school housing insecure, or if there are emotional and mental health issues in a family, like what can you hope what can you hope for that child in the context of your daily work? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You know, like most people I talk to are like, go find a partner to do that. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to have a really good partner to like hand that off, because that's existential stuff. And I'm curious to know what people think and feel. Like we're in the middle of like making this decision from a budgetary perspective for the year ahead. Like, are we going to keep continuing doing these basic needs things? And what does that mean for us going forward? And I don't know the answer, but I know, again, these things existed previously and have only gotten worse for many, many families. And our ability to take that seriously and respond and not just say it's too big to deal with or it's somebody else's to deal with, it doesn't feel quite the answer.
Thanks, Rich. Anyone else want to weigh in before we get to audience questions?
I guess I would say, and maybe it's a little funny that the funder is going to show up radical for some, but moving away from family and community as voices or informants against your agenda or someone else, you know, the school, the institution's agenda, and actually inviting folks in to problem identification, to solution formation, to co-constructing, accountability measures, right? So really shifting power so that there is a seamless and integrated connection, but it isn't just, you know, formative research or testing, triangulating your idea with how resonant it is, but actually inverting to have family and community at the beginning of any one process. I think when we talk about the tactical, ask families, you know, what would be most helpful? What is the nature of the support that would be most resonant for you? Versus moving quickly to deploy resources that might not yet hit the sweet spot of what matters most to families. Because, you know, we could get really into our researcher or intellectual stance about what other people need, and it often doesn't hit the mark.
Yeah.
I can add go ahead, Jabali.
No, go ahead, Julie.
I can add from the academic component. We have done some surveys during the pandemic, and we tried to be flexible because oftentimes schools aren't as flexible. So one of the things we heard, like, you guys have this great schedule, but I'm working too, and I'm in the computer too, and I cannot possibly sit with my 5-year-old, even though you guys think that's a really great idea right now, and do this lesson. So we've been trying to be flexible between synchronous and asynchronous, or, you know, try to name it for parents. This week it looks like this, so then parents can plan accordingly, and then saying to them, this is your resource if this doesn't work for you, right? Because everyone's not going to say. So giving them an adult that they feel comfortable with as their resource of what works and not works. And the other thing is, I think it just, like earlier, it causes us to ask why, right? You know, this kid hasn't done any homework, you know, and nothing's getting turned in. Well, I think of myself, I have a freshman and a senior, and I'm like, you didn't turn it in? Like, I don't even know, right? Because I'm also working. So when we think about it, it's like asking parents the why and giving kids and adults a chance to adapt. This is all new to everyone. And the more flexible that we can be and actually show caring and warmth, I felt like we've become closer to some of our families in this pandemic because we all need each other. And what it's taught us is parents are partners. And when we think about reimagining schools, we need to think about this very different, and how it's not, we bring them along the way, that their voice matters, and how do we tie their voice into our voice to truly educate the whole child. That's the thing I would add to it.
And listen, just quickly, just to manage the way that we frame the problem. So often we see ourselves as the solution. we don't have a monopoly on strategy or resilience or perseverance. So to even frame the question, what can we do to help them, I think sets up this duality that is problematic in the spaces that we operate. And what can they do to help us may be a better way to frame it. But if we ever catch ourselves asking what can we do to help them, that kind of separation is at the root of, I think, a lot of problems we face within the spaces we operate.
Well said, Jabali. Thank you. I will make sure that we change that up. Thank you. Appreciate it. Listen, you gotta take this stuff for real. We have about time for one more question before I close us out, and Jesse or Teddy, if you could chime in with a question from the participants.
Absolutely. The question is, early on, the point was made that the providers need to ensure their cups are full in order to help others. What are you all thinking or planning about the work with teachers in terms of their own traumas and questions?
I can start where we currently are. And it's a process. So we don't, like Joy, we don't have all these answers. So we formed a working group. And the purpose of the working group is us to learn together, right? To learn together of what does wellness look like for adults, what does wellness look like for students. So we're still in the phases of that working group. Once we come, the findings out of that working group, then we will implement across the organization in order to help refill cup or think about wellness or what adults need and how they need it. So basically we're all getting together, we're having these really good conversations because we don't have all the answers. We haven't been in this before. And then figuring out what that can look like. And again, I would say like a toolbox. What one adult needs is not the same as what another adult needs. And that's the issue. People often think, well, these are the 5 things you should do and this will help. But first and foremost, we're doing this thing out of the ruler method, which is really about like, who are you? Why do you show up and how do you show up, right? Because if you get to the why of who the person is and why and how they show up, then you know the triggers, you know how to work collaboratively with them. So we're starting with the working group, coming up with the toolkit, train the toolkit, and the toolkit training is not top down. It'll be the members of the working group that represent across the organization. So we're in the stages of that right now.
Yeah, I would just add to build off of Julie. We're spending a lot of time as we get ready for the summer, meeting with our team members, some of whom are teachers, many of whom are alums from the different schools. We're doing focus groups with all of our key stakeholders, with our alumni, with our team members, with parents, but specifically for the group that is going to be working at camp this summer, going out and figuring out where they are at, kind of meeting them where they are, trying to get information from them as we help build our program for this coming summer. It's going to look very different, and utilizing their expertise and their experience to try to give them as great a summer as we can, because while our camps and our programs are very much for the students, for the campers, they're also incredibly important for our 18 to 22 year olds who are trying to find their purpose and trying to figure out where they're headed moving forward. So we're forward. So we're spending a bunch of time with them as well.
Josh, if I can, I'm getting my phone's getting blown up by our head of SEL, Kalila Hogard, who's the real expert at this and should be the one who's talking today. But she reminds me that, like, if you take, there's tons of research around SEL for adults, and there are practices like circles, like shared goal setting, like shared feedback, like self-reflection, like all of these things where staff have voice and shared collaboration and opportunities for reflection. And there's tons of literature on how to do that, and it's easy to do, and staff appreciate it, and we know they will need it in this moment. So there are really basic technical responses to this, which are easily within everybody's reach, and I don't want to lose sight of that.
Great, thank you. We're gonna move to the close. I will just say to participants who are out there who didn't get their questions answered, I know that Jabali and Giselle and Julie and Rich will be happy to answer any questions. You can reach out to Change Summer and me, and I can facilitate that for sure. I know they'd be happy to do that. I'm going to close this out so we can finish at 1:15. First off, thank you so much to our panelists, Julie Jackson, Dr. Giselle Shorter, Rich Berlin, and Jabali Sawicki. Before we close, I do want to ask you to consider supporting Change Summer. As I started Change Summer to help close what we often refer to as the opportunity gap by ensuring children from all backgrounds experience high quality, engaging summer opportunities that build the social emotional skills critical for college and career success. And given the pandemic, as we've discussed today, our work is as critical as it's ever been. This summer, our plan is to operate programs at the University of Rhode Island for 1,000 4th through 9th grade students from Achievement First and Uncommon Schools. Our campers will participate in a robust program consisting of swimming, athletics, arts, music, theater, and outdoor adventure. And each day, campers will take part in a dedicated social emotional activity block focused on identity, equity, and purpose. Simply put, our students need this opportunity. So I hope you will consider making a donation to Change Summer. You can do so in two ways. If you want to text a real cool text feature, if you want to text CTC to 202-858-1233, that's CTC to 202-858-1233. Or second way you can donate is through our website, which is changesummer.org. We'll make sure we put that in the chat right now. Teddy or Jesse will take care of that. And finally, I hope you'll join us for part 3 of our panel series, which is creating opportunities for all through high quality summer programs. We're going to have members of the camp team, Change Summer. We'll have some students that'll join us. We'll share that date and time very, very soon. In the meantime, I want to wish everybody a great long weekend. Happy Valentine's Day, and please stay safe. And with that, we will wrap up. Thank you all so much. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Gratitude, everybody. Keep shining, keep working hard, y'all.
Be well, be safe.
Be well, be safe.
Thank you all. Take
Thanks,
good
guys.
care.